Daniel Frídel, ladies and gentlemen, who will load his own presentation and talk about demilitarization.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Daniel Frídel, and the topic at hand is demilitarization. I would like to begin with what John Lennon suggests when he dares challenge us. Imagine all the people living life in peace. What a seemingly daunting task nowadays, isn't it? Yet, why should people be concerned about the absence of peace and thus a lack of security when there are armies for their protection? And that's the pivotal question of my paper, as the need for the existence of national military forces and their dynamic expansion with regards to international peacekeeping efforts is to be challenged for its logical consistence. So my research begins with a discussion on human nature, where it is acknowledged that regardless of whether one is more inclined towards any of the prominent theories about who we truly are, be it either egoistic beasts or pure souls, one thing is certain. Human history, or human species, has experienced a long history of warfare, bloodshed, and decisions to resort to violence instead of alternative methods of conflict resolution. Subsequently, I embarked on a trip that introduces the reader to the milestones in the military evolution, terminating in the late 20th century when the abandonment of conscription in a growing number of countries has testified to the shift in the source of state legitimacy, which had been derived from state military prowess before it became state's ability to provide for its people. Admittedly, such a trend has not been omnipresent. Many contemporary states have retained their armed forces, and some have even set out to bolster their military capacity. And I argue that aspirations for global peace cannot be predicated on the assumption that its attainment is possible through hard power. So with the aid of numerous academics, I point out the fact that the global trend towards increasing military expenditure and the privileging of security solutions makes a significant contribution to conflict's continuity and escalation. Furthermore, it's important to realize that one's perception of the human nature ultimately determines their view of the human race's future. So I believe that the world is to be peaceful insofar as its members are willing to lay down their weapons, rescue themselves from the burden of the realist mentality, and finally walk their walk. We have paid enough lip service to the notion of global peace. Understandably, such a sensitive process requires conditions to be conducive to its implementation, as well as audacity, encouraging those nations in which favorable conditions can be found. And therefore, upon shedding light on the concept of demilitarization, analyzing its implications and acknowledging its impediments, Czechia, the Czech Republic, is proposed as a pioneer of true promotion of peace in the Eastern Hemisphere. So by now I believe you have discovered that my work has a rather argumentative structure and that it's rather controversial, to say the least. Well, in the second chapter, I define the concept of demilitarization using autonomous phenomena and pertinent concepts. So besides that, demilitarization includes the decommissioning of weaponry and demobilization of military personnel and other associated measures. It signifies a greater structural transformation. So demilitarization is broadly defined as a multidimensional process that involves the reversal of militarization through sustained reduction in the size and influence of the military sector in state and society, and the reallocation of military resources to civilian purposes. Such a definition, however, does not express the entirety of what I'm talking about. So the processes mentioned refer primarily to the demilitarization of state apparatus, having implications in both political and economic dimensions. Yet another fundamental aspect that is to be taken into consideration is demilitarization of the society, which can be interpreted as a psychological as well as practical process. And this section is followed by another in which favorable conditions are listed, conditions for fostering development of a given nation in weaponless fashion. In other words, here I attempt to provide universally applicable theoretical framework for demilitarization. In the next chapter, titled The State of Play in the World, I discuss the magnitude of the impact that the realist school of thought, international relations theory, has on international relations. I applaud the achievements of the European project called the European Union and identify the pressures that it faces in terms of military commitments from its link to the world hegemon, the United States of America. I also address the underlying motivations that arguably play a role with regards to the emphasis put on militarization today. And then we learn about the Enlightenment. To take this exaggeration with a grain of salt, I simply introduce almost all of the contemporary demilitarized states, detailing the case of one Central American nation, which I personally consider to be the source of most of my inspiration and hopes. Costa Rica serves as inspiration for what might be ahead of humanity. So, being located in a region with a long history of military dictatorships, fraught with civil wars, Costa Rica has been soldierless for 70 years. They don't have an army, and unlike its authoritarian and armed neighbors, it has grown to become a stable democracy, high participation rates, free social security provisions, healthcare, education, advanced commitment to sustainable growth, and extraordinarily happy citizenry. And there's so much more to say. Now, in the following two chapters, I finally move back home to the heart of Europe. So I firstly analyze the Czech security environment and eventually articulate a proposal for an action plan. And there's again so much more to say to fully explain and justify my intentions and thoughts. Long story short, I propose that Czechia submit its notice of denunciation to the government of the United States of America, as provided in Article 13 of the North Atlantic Treaty, thereby ceasing to be committed to its objectives after 1 year thenceforth and start demilitarizing. This proposal is nevertheless contingent upon a number of factors that are to be addressed prior to its adoption. So the process of demilitarization of the Czech Republic would initially entail a shift in the public opinion, to a great extent facilitated by a coordinated and political-led initiative, then enactment of a comprehensive reform of the private security sector, constitutionalization of the Czech Republic's status of neutrality, providing for the abolishment of the Czech army, and the ensuing implementation of a demobilization and reintegration program. Such a long-term deliverable has to be driven by a gradual and steady collective action of a top-down character, inspired by the notion that a country's standing army can only be an implied threat for other nations. So provided that Czech representatives to institutions concerned will be eloquent enough to formulate the motivations for such a decision, Czech Republic may become role model for other nations to come. But nonetheless, the Czech people and their leaders must first become adherents of the credo, reminding of the fact that if war is illegal under the international law, so should be armies. Their retention in the 21st century is only a bad habit, cultivated by ill-defined concepts of national interests, often privileging national pride over people. We had a discussion with Dr. Dolecek, who is an expert on international Asian theory. He agreed, but then comes the practical aspect. All right, so His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, reminded us in his address to the members of the European Parliament in Strasbourg in 1988 that the unthinkable has once become a reality when Germany and France, after centuries of bloody animosities, joined forces and began to co-create peaceful Europe. And I do believe that demilitarization is the way to achieve global peace. So in conclusion, you may say that I'm a dreamer. I'm not the only one.
I would put my weapon down after this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any Costa Rican in the room? I just thought it would. Anyway, Dr. Badrova.
No, thank you for that presentation. Very interesting idea, and you have a great presentation style, not just visually, but obviously the public speaking as well. I guess, and this is, I just would like to hear your thoughts on this. You mentioned how in order to start this project, to start the laying down of arms in the country, and this kind of thing, that there needs to be a certain level of, courageousness or trust or these things. And what do you think it would take to inspire, for example, the Chinese public speaking? And how could, aside from your wonderful talk, how could, a country be inspired to actually do this?
Okay, I've reconciled myself with the fact that this probably won't happen in my lifetime. However, I've started confronting people who are prominent figures in this field and who are very active when it comes to public discourse on the topic of security. The discourse needs to change. So far, we've been very insecure, feeling insecure, although when it comes to our national reports on the security threats, not only by the Czech government, but by other European governments and also the European Commission, for example, there are no threats that actually constitute a threat that should be confronted by some conventional military methods. And I think it's really just a feeling of insecurity. So when it comes to practical steps and the changing of the discourse, looking back to Costa Rica, what happened there wasn't a planned coordinated action. It was just overnight course of action taken by a new ruler who won a civil war. So the conditions circumstances were just different, way different. And I'm trying to learn a lesson from there that could be passed on to us. It's just different. I'm still trying to learn from that. I think it's the way.
I wanted to ask about the circumstances in Costa Rica. How did they achieve it? What you just mentioned it.
What happened was that this ruler who was he won a civil war, which was a common phenomenon in that area and still is, unfortunately. And he realized that retaining civil weapons within that area will only cause troubles in the foreseeable future. And so he came to the conviction that if he wants to really centralize the power and seize the power in complete fashion, he needs to get rid of his opponents and also the tools that they may use. So the rationale behind it wasn't as pacifistic as one may wish, but it worked. What he did was he grabbed a hammer and he smashed the wall, which was the symbol of the military bases in the area, and he relocated all the resources to education. I haven't been there yet, but I watched the movie and I've read so much of literature on Costa Rica and their educational system, and the culture of peace has been ingrained in their educational system. And they demonstrated it not only in terms of political speeches of their representatives, but also they actually ended up having a border dispute, transnational conflict with their neighbor, Nicaragua, a couple of years ago. What they did was they submitted their differences to the International Court of Justice for arbitration and resolved it peacefully. That's how it should be done.
Any questions or comments from the public? Andre.
So my comment is that, in my opinion, it only takes one person, well in this case country, that doesn't agree with this. And then we have 270 countries in the world?
119.
Yeah, sure. So it only takes one country with it has to be economically well, they have to be doing economically well, of course, and need to be a strong country, but it only takes one, and this whole plan falls like a house of cards.
Exactly. Thank you for that. Professor Butcher mentioned trust. It's very important. Therefore, I selected, my homeland, Czechia. I know that the world changes. We should not rely on the current state of affairs. But still, our conditions when it comes to the external security environment and internal to some extent as well, we are surrounded by allies. We haven't been engaged in conflict for decades. And it could be a sort of stepping stone, sort of if there is a nation which finds itself in favorable conditions or under, surrounded by an environment that will be conducive to that endeavor. And it could convey a very, very strong message. Which might not be perceived positively, but may make a difference.
Yes, sir.
Very good talk, very interesting, really, thank you very much. But I kind of disagree with you a little bit. If you, maybe you're familiar with it, the latest book of Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now, he's talking about something that the state versus state wars have decreased to almost being inexistent in the world right now. So the main threat to the world right now is not armies controlled by states, legal armies controlled by states. The main threat in the world right now, I think, is extremist terrorism and malignant line of thought that comes from certain ideologies and even, to say, religions. So the first step for the demilitarization, I would say, is a later step to a first step. First of all, stop selling weapons to militias and minority groups, and because if they hold the weapons and you don't, then the next is like some kind of inferno, because they will. No, I would say that the Czech Republic and whole Europe should hold on to their weapons for as long as the threat of terrorism and extremism is there. And the first step there is to maybe restrict the consumerist capitalism thought of I don't want to name the countries that sell their weapons for money, for some people who have the money but have malignant ideologies.
Thank you. Yeah. May I respond very quickly?
Of course.
Interesting. The European Union and the European nation have been inclined towards demilitarizing and reducing their expenditure, military expenditure, or expenditure in defense sector. But given what happened, Ukraine crisis 2014, and increased aggression from the side of Russian Federation, these sentiments have been sort of suppressed by our biggest ally, the nation we're referring to. So after the Wales summit in 2014, you might have heard about the commitment, 2% contribution by each NATO member, 2% of their GDP towards their own defense sector. And so this pressure is coming from the very West, despite that Europe wants to demilitarize. And it's not only the nation we're referring to selling weapons to Saudis while claiming, let's bring peace to the Middle East. We'll not make peace by selling their weapons. But yeah.
Thank you, Daniel.